This episode of the Beer Bound Podcast is brought to you by Rolling Hops Beer Tours.
Hey everybody, Garrett here from Rolling Hops, as always joined with my partner,
Andy.
We're here to tell you guys about our virtual craft beer tour offering. With what's going on in the world, unfortunately, we haven't been able to run our historical craft walking beer tours, so we've pivoted to taking the virtual experience of craft beer directly to you guys. Wonderful for team building events, corporate events, even just a night out or in, for that matter, with your friends and family. And we're doing this online.
Have any questions about the beer tours or want us to tailor make an event for you? Just shoot us an email or send us a message on any form of social media. Rolling Hops, you can find us everywhere.
RollingHopsBeerTours.com is where you can get a hold of us, and we'll see you guys soon.
Cheers.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Beer Bound Podcast. We are very excited to be joined by Phil Winters from Goodlot Farmstead Brewing. Phil and his partner, Gail, established Goodlot Farmstead in 2009. They are an organic hop farm and brewery in the Greenbelt region of Caledon. The farm brewery utilizes fresh, hyper-local ingredients grown on their farm and other Ontario farms to make fresh farm-raised beer. We're looking forward to learning more about Goodlot Farmstead Brewing and exactly what it takes to run not only a brewery, but also a farm to boot. So without further ado, we welcome Phil to the Beer Bound Podcast. Hello, Phil.
Hello, Andy. Hello, Garrett. A farm to boot, oot and a boot on our podcast today.
You got it. Can't get more Canadian than that. Yeah. Phil, maybe you can start us off. Tell Garrett and I a little bit about yourself, your connection to beer, and why on earth you'd want to start a brewery and a hop farm.
Sure, man. I mean, I'll keep that as brief as possible. That's a lot of years in territory right now. But so Gail, who is my partner in life and crime, my wife Gail, and I were young lovers way back in university a long time ago, and then reconnected later in life. And when we decided to have a child, we wanted to move back to her hometown of Caledon and start farming. She was in film production. I was basically a political activist, and live with our hands in the soil. So that's sort of the root of this part of our journey. And so we wound up on this 27-acre farm in Caledon, and spent that first season discussing what we were going to grow. What was our specialty crop going to be as a 27-acre farm? You definitely are doing specialty crops. You're not doing big grains. I can't be doing malted barley here or malting barley, things of that nature. And so hops, 2009 to 10, there was a global shortage of hops because of a big warehouse fire, and a bad growing season in Europe and Yakima. And so price spiked. IPAs were bouncing, at that point in the States. And so we said, hey, let's be hop farmers, and we'll supply organic local product to this, burgeoning craft beer market. And we're drinking craft beer the whole time. I just moved back to Toronto not too many years before that. I'd been in Denver, Colorado for 10 years, where the craft beer scene was. And I worked for the guy who started the first brew pub in Colorado, who was running for mayor and then governor, etc. And kind of got the bug in Colorado, particularly about what really good beer was. And just like fast forward to being an established hop farmer. And we had this gathering at Nicholas Shout's farm with a couple of brewers, one of whom was Charles McLean. And I'd been back in Canada for a while at that point, and Charles brought some fresh pale ale that he'd made. And it was the best beer I'd had since I'd been back in Ontario. It harkened to me like some of the styles I've been enjoying in Colorado. I was like, wow, there's totally terroir in beer. Charles is amazing. This is interesting. So eventually the hop farm led us to making beer on the farm in 2017. God, I don't even remember the question. That answer was so long.
Detailed and thorough, though. Absolutely.
Okay, good.
Sorry. Yeah, that was.
I told you it was my second beer, and I may be a bit verbose.
Verbose is never a bad thing. So but Phil, where are you from originally? I think I missed that.
Okay. So I'm from Sault Ste. Marie.
Wow, the Sioux.
Yeah, from the Sioux. Always meet every room I ever am in. I always meet somebody from Sault Ste. Marie. So I'm from the Sioux. Gail's from Caledon, where this farm and brewery are located. She was raised up here, and I'm from the Sioux. Pisces, turned 50 this year.
Happy birthday, Phil.
Thanks, man.
That's really cool. So you went to Denver, Colorado prior to 2009, correct? So you had some experience in the beer world prior to that. Is that right?
No. I had no experience in the beer world. I moved to Colorado out of university. So I was at Queens and Kingston and had a great time, got a political science degree, and thought there might be some application for that in the world of political activism to, fight for the protection of the planet. And so I moved to Colorado because I was fascinated by the mountains. I had a green card, which is really why I went to the States, just to fulfill this and start something fresh and see the world from a different perspective. And got deeply involved in the climate change sort of action back in, that was 1996, 1997 was my first full-time climate change campaign. And that set me off on a path of really working on environmental issues, 92% of which has been climate change related since 96, 97 through the David Suzuki Foundation, and then into, forms of business, trying to find business solutions for climate crisis. How do we transition to solar power? Particularly became a huge focus for me for 10 years. And then that eventually all melded into, the philosophy of how Gail and I wanted to run an organic farm here in Caledon on the doorstep of Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
First with the crops, and then with sort of the inputs and the traceability of the ingredients that you're putting into the finished product. That, it's just like having cows, milking them and making the milk and selling it out your door. We grow the hops and throw them into a tank of beer and sell that out the front door. And so it's sort of that principle. But the DNA was that we had to account for all carbon impact that starting this new brewery would. Because when we started the farm, we installed just over 10 kilowatts of solar PV and monitored that for the first, that was from 2010 until 2017 before we started making beer. We had 7 years of data to say we produce way more energy every year than we consume on this operation, and therefore we are carbon negative. That did not account for the fact that we still have a diesel tractor. We don't have an electric tractor yet. And so when we extended, there's a lot of electricity consumed in this building because our brewery is 100% electric. We don't combust fossil fuels on site. And so we chose that path because there isn't a gas line to our farm to begin with. So we'd be looking at a big propane tank. And I understand kilowatt hours a lot more than sort of kilojoules and propane energy. And so once we establish sort of our maximum brewing capacity in here, we can create enough solar power to offset that, to know, hey, we are on site literally climate positive. And so we do the same thing in our farming practices to sequester CO2. So that drives everything we do. And that really moves into, why we choose this super terroir passion of trying to create beers that truly are the flavor of Ontario versus, using adjuncts from other parts of the world. Let's find those flavors, but defines terroir ultimately. And everybody's doing it at the base level with water, because the water is that base ingredient.
That's awesome. I like that. I guess maybe I've heard the term carbon neutral over and over and over again, but you're actually carbon negative. It's not,
we're not
so
yet.
just,
We totally were. I want to be clear about that, because it's you got to chase that and you have to document that quite heavily.
Oh, I see.
When we added, tons of kilowatt hours of consumption with this giant, I say giant, smallest commercial brewing system, basically, right? 10 barrel system, but to us, giant vat of water through electrical resistance, it's a lot of energy that gets consumed. And so that requires more solar. So we put in another 10 kilowatts, but we don't have enough data yet really to determine how much more we need to put in. Just not to riff on this too much, but simultaneously, the brewery we're in is an old barn, and it was renovated by the Fourth Pig Worker Co-op, who are an amazing, contractor in Ontario that do the highest energy efficiency straw bale buildings, rammed earth, solar PV, whatever. They only take on projects that are going to be as carbon neutral as possible. So they did this amazing renovation in this building when we decided to buy this used brewing equipment and bring it in here. that to what's called passive house standards. So it's super airtight, super insulated. You can pretty much heat this building in the winter with 3 or 4 candles if we needed to. So,
Oh, wow.
so again, it's a huge part of what we do, aside from being hop farmers and using local ingredients. It's sort of that confluence of trying to do what we think is, the right local, sustainable, like how do we keep money in our neighborhood kind of thing, which local breweries are generally about. But we tend to be water wasteful. That's been something we've all confronted. Energy wasteful, and not to be negative, but most Ontario breweries do not buy Ontario adjuncts to put in their beer. And so the local hop farms and grain farmers, who are few and far between, are not necessarily part of this journey, not part of this like growing economic factor that all this local beer is driving in such a positive way. And we've literally seen the bell curve of hop farmers in Ontario, because we started with about 7 other farms, the Ontario Hop Growers Association. We went from 7 farms to, I think we were at 63 or 67, from like 40 acres to 440 acres over the course of 5 years, as people were like, hey, this is great. And we had an association to bring people in and train them. And now, because breweries are not supporting those farmers, we've seen half of those farms disappear, half that acres disappear, and people are literally pulling their poles out. And that was huge expense to become a hop farmer. Poles, cables, plant life, new equipment. It's a huge investment, and the follow-up hasn't been there from the brewing community. So that we really talk about this a lot, because we're trying to encourage this type of behavior.
Yeah, no kidding. You just went through so much, and I want to ask so many questions. I gotta line this up. But
I got questions too.
I'll keep my answers much shorter. Usually people are like, hey, okay, shorten it.
No,
no,
that's
it's
great.
good.
Just give me the signal.
Garrett, go ahead.
Well, since you brought up, the Ontario Hop Growers Association, I thought that was pretty interesting. I was, looking you up and checking out Goodlot, and noticed, on your website, you mentioned that you co-founded the association. So, you mentioned a little bit about it, but maybe you can go over, why it was founded and what exactly that the mandate of the association is.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I'm not super active in it right now, so I can't speak for the current leadership and the direction that we're going in. But at the beginning of the genesis was Remy and Nick Shout and a few other folks around the province, mostly in Southern Ontario, not too far from where we sit right now, all within about an hour. We're growing hops, and there's obviously, I remember the very first meeting I had, I'd gone to talk to James Tien when we decided to grow hops. I wanted to grow from Muskoka. So I went to Muskoka and went to James Tien, who was the head brewer at the time, like, what hops do you use? I'm going to grow hops for you. And he was like, oh, you got to meet these 2 guys and this guy, Nick Shout. And I met with these other 2 guys. I don't remember their names, downtown in Toronto at some point. They're like, oh yeah, you shouldn't grow hops. You can't make any money growing hops. You can't grow hops. And I was like, I'm a young new farmer. I'm totally like, of course we can make this work. Incredulous. I'm like, well, of course you can make money growing hops. And so we pursued that, as did other people with that same sort of attitude and dream, because Ontario is not a great climate for hop growing. It used to be a major hop center, as you probably know, or your viewers know. Prince Edward County was exporting a huge amount of hops to New York State back in the day. And so, and there's wild hops, not wild, they're sort of naturalized imported hops that are on fence lines from eradicated hop fields that we all chase as hop farmers still. And so the idea was that all these dreamers, most of whom were not traditional farmers, we need to work together. And if we don't have an association, the government of Ontario is not going to assign a specialty crop analyst to this crop, which we know has a lot of diseases and a lot of pests, and we need that support from the province. And so the association was founded, I think it was probably 2011, March of 2011, at the Guelph Guelph Organic Conference. And the whole idea was to support each other and to grow the industry and to make connections. We didn't have a mandate at the beginning. The mandate became, how do we study together, learn together, do crop analysis, do growing practice analysis, so that we can all get better at this, share best practices, success, and also connect with the brewing world, which seems to be the one thing we never really did successfully. Gail used to be on the board. I never have been. We were very invested for a long time. Now, we spend all of our time working here on this farm. It's hard to do anything other than that. But the one thing we failed at doing was clearly connecting the breweries to the high quality hops. And understandably, in those early days, some hop farmers would show up at a brewery with rotten hops. And I've heard this from the guys at Great Lakes. Oh yeah, a guy showed up here with a garbage bag full of hops. We pulled them out. They were all moldy and wet because they hadn't been dried. There was no processing. People didn't know what to do. They just thought, of course, breweries are going to want this. So maybe there was a negative attribute hanging over the industry to some degree. But the fact is, we only use Ontario hops in our beer. 10% to 18% in each brew usually comes from this farm. And the rest come from 4 or 5 other Ontario hop farms. And we grow spectacular hops in Ontario. Like, that is a fact. The Great Lakes region, has really learned together. There's a great local ingredient at people's fingertips, but it's disappearing slowly if people don't reach out and as they do with others, contract out, a couple of years, 5 years, of course. Who doesn't need Cascade? We generally grow Cascade, Centennial, and Chinook in Ontario. The big C's are what do well. Because hops are so prone to disease. European varietals don't really work well. I mean, we could do 2 podcasts literally on the history of the hop industry in Ontario, because the horror stories of, the growth of the board of directors and the pieces that came in and the disappointments and the chaos. Oh my God, there's so many stories about the Ontario hop industry.
I'm gonna book you in for that second podcast.
Yeah, can you
bring
write a
Nick
book?
Shout in?
Really
I have to bring some other people. I wouldn't. Nicholas Shout would probably write the book. I would think would be Nick.
Okay,
maybe we
no,
can
that's
have
pretty interesting. And so I then went to go check out, obviously, natural next step to go check out Ontario Hop Growers Association, and there's some really cool stats on there. And I know you said you're not as involved anymore, but maybe playing back to what you recently mentioned, someone would go to a brewer with a bag full of hops and try and sell it in that way, in shape, and form. So I'm very curious. When we're on these podcasts, we do talk to brewers, brewery owners, and we get into, there's always inevitably a discussion about distribution of your product, right? How beer gets from the brewery, obviously, to the consumer. But we never really had a conversation about how hops are necessarily distributed. I don't know if you do have some insight on that. I'd love to hear it.
Well, I mean, those relationships are generally, again, a failure potentially of the Ontario Hops Growers Association to this point, or during our time involved, is that we didn't get together a cooperative sort of, distribution methodology coupled with a cooperative processing. So there's this, one standard, we process at Nicholas's farm. He has organic certification, organic, certified processing, having those. And we flirted with that, especially back when the Liberal government was pretty interested in a special situation, a farm economy like this, to set up a couple of processing centers across the province. And so now it's really your relationship, and it really always has been. We've never matured from that. It's you making a relationship with the brewery. And thankfully, for the people who I think are being fairly successful with their hop sales right now, they are, they have friends who own breweries. I mean, there's how many people own breweries in Ontario? You go to a ski hill and you're like, hey, you should serve our beer at your ski hill. Like, oh, it's really tough. 9 of our members, own breweries at the ski hill. So those are our 9 beers. And by virtue of, that statistic, there are a lot of hop farmers that have friends in the beer industry. So whether they're at Wellington or elsewhere. And so people make contracts. We just contracted with Scott Hayho and his brother Hayho Hops, because he was going to rip out a variety that we consider very, very important, Centennial, for us. It's in a base of our Big Head Amber. We love that hop. We don't grow it on this farm. We grow Chinook, Cascade, and Nugget here. And so we need to have a Centennial supplier. And he said, well, it's troublesome. It's more effort to do that than to sell the volumes of other hops, because little flowers, big flowers, same amount of effort in. And so we contracted with him for the next few years, like, we'll buy all of your Centennial, or this is how much Centennial we will buy. And so it's really a direct relationship, with the brewery. Everybody's packaging the same way. Hey, they're growing great products. We all have great methodologies in place now. Everything is T90s and Mylar vacuum sealed nitrogen flush bags. Some are flash frozen, like Clear Valley Hops does. So they literally are from bind to frozen pellets within, usually 48 hours on the outside. I mean, they're so efficient at what they do. I mean, like locking in this flavor profile. The other thing, just in terms of distribution, the greatest opportunity for us as hop farmers, always has been doing wet hop collaborations. I don't know how you guys feel about wet hop beers. They're one of my favorite styles, and they're totally, we were able to do it until this year when Bellwoods, bought cryo frozen hops from the Pacific Northwest. But generally, you can only do wet hop beers when the farm is right beside the brewery. And that is a style of beer that is ancient and delicious. And it's just like that seasonal, you get it for a couple of weeks potentially during harvest. And so if more hop farmers could collaborate on wet hop beers with major breweries, their entire crop would go to that one thing. And that would support agriculture in Ontario big time.
Yeah, one big harvest going to 1 or 2 or 3 or 7 big brews to different breweries. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I'm sure you've obviously heard of like Ontario craft brewers. Like, was there ever, and that's like association for
OCB,
craft, exactly, for craft brewers. Was there ever any talks of maybe getting in touch with them?
100%. So I mean that back and forth in terms of OCB and OGA having these conversations and working together. And that last I heard, again, not that involved currently. That's an ongoing conversation that they should be sort of almost under the same umbrella. But they need that connection. And OCB has been really supportive. I mean, I should say OCB has been very supportive of OGA from the get-go. And so there's a connection there, but what's the formality of that it works, for the farmers and the brewers, obviously. I mean, the prohibited, some people are going to be yelling at me right now on the screen, be like, well, you're selling your hops for $20 a pound versus the $7 a pound I pay for, I don't even know. I don't know what Citra costs because we don't use Citra or Mosaic or those guys. They're probably in the $12 range would be my guess. But you want to buy some Pacific Northwest Cascade, Alpha 7%. You're probably paying $7 at the most, I would think right now. Again, we only buy Ontario, and that spot market doesn't exist. We pay $15 to $22 a pound for our hops. So that has always been a prohibiting factor for local breweries, because again, it's not, this is not a huge money-making industry. It's all passion and work environment and lifestyle that you're choosing when you work in a brewery, own a brewery, whatever. And so
you need to reduce costs where you can, so it makes sense. It is still a business at the end of the day.
Yeah, but hops are such a small factor in what you pay for each brew. So really, people, anyway. I mean, there's a lot of issues in the beer industry to attack right now. Racism, sexism, misogyny. Local ingredients is on. I mean, environmental impact, water impact, and local ingredients. It's all, but there may be some bigger fish to fry as we work our way down. I shouldn't complain so much about local farmers not being supported. It's like, so I shouldn't complain too much because we love the relationships we have with hop farmers, and we always did. Like Muskoka and Nickelbrook were my 2 biggest customers. They launched our company, making a commitment. Muskoka bought my entire yield one year, and Nickelbrook bought half my hops and wet hops one other year. And those were like the years that cemented us, like, this is working. We're farmers. We're going to keep doing this. We're going to expand. We're going to invest in this, because those guys supported local small farms. So I'm giving credit where credit is due. And there's lots of awesome breweries in Ontario that do buy a ton of local hops. So kudos to them. It's just with 500, the 500, sort of brands in Ontario right now, Ontario based, between contract and bricks and mortar. You can almost count on those 2 hands how many people actually invest in local hops.
Well, I'm sure you went to Nickelbrook and Muskoka with a little bit more than just a garbage bag full of hops. So.
Oh yeah, ILR bags, nitrogen flushed for sure. T90 pellets. We were really committed to whole leaf hops when we started. We're like, Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, man, whole leaf hops. We're just going to do whole leaf hops. But that lasted 2 years, and people were like, yeah, no, we want pellets. It's like, okay, pellets it is.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Phil,
very interesting.
Yeah, Phil, is it really the only, like you mentioned this previously, and you mentioned it again, that the reason why local craft breweries in Ontario don't want to go with the local hops, is it solely in price? There's no other reason, perhaps a notion of quality, something like that? Is it entirely based on cost?
No, there's definitely, a hangover from the wet, moldy bags of hops at the beginning of the industry, which is like any industry, in its nascent form. Price was definitely a factor as well, but I think it goes back to this distribution. Like, if BSG were to say, you know what, I'm going to buy 100 kg of these 5 hops from these 5 farms and put that on their price list for the year. So instead of buying Yakima Chief Cascade, they're like, oh, I'm going to throw 10% of my Cascade to these local hops. We'll find some beers to feature it in and talk about the local hops, because that's cool. I mean, who doesn't want farm to table, the barrel to bottle out of the field kind of approach? I mean, I think people naturally want to know that their food is coming locally and it's fresh and it hasn't been shipped across an ocean. And obviously there's a lot of global trade that goes on with everything around us, but those fresh products, and I always think of beer as being like lettuce. It should be consumed as fresh as possible generally, except for the big ones that you're going to cellar and things you want to see advance. But I think, BSG would have a huge impact on what the local hop farms look like in terms of distribution, and do, provide I mean, everybody gets their hops tested. So I know exactly, I know like 82 factors of every hop I buy in Ontario. And Mike Brooks, who makes our beer here, who is the master of beer ceremony, he looks at alpha and he's like, yeah, that's what I'm looking for. It's like beta and, the 18 other terpenes and other things that are being presented to me in my test report, he doesn't really care about. We will probably care about those as time goes on a little bit longer, because we're still managing our water chemistry, which changes seasonally, and just trying to lock in profiles in our operation to make something that really awesome, consistent, unique, terroir driven, that stands out in the world of beer ideally.
Mm-hmm. What's the percentage, Phil, of the hops that you cultivate that go directly to your brewery? What's the percentage?
So 100% of the hops that we cultivate, and we only have a 2.5 acre hop farm, which at the dawn of hop farming in Ontario was big time. And other people came in and threw in, major hop yards after us. We self-consume 100% of our hops, except wet hops. This is the first year we've done it like in a mass scale. We've always, my very first customer, my very first customer was Mary Beth Keefe, who head brewer at Granite, brewer of the year. She just won like legitimately, I think last week. And Ron took an interest in what we were doing, and Mary Beth was taking over the brew deck at that point. And so they'd come out and they'd pick hops with us, and we'd make these wet hop beers. We do collaborations for wet hop competitions. And she had been presented with bags of moldy wet hops. We brought nice dry, non-vacuum, or they were vacuum sealed, but they weren't nitrogen flushed, early day hops, and she made great beer with them. So there's just a need for local breweries to support local farmers.
Gotcha. So now all the hops that you cultivate, you
100%.
use. You don't
100%.
sell anything anymore.
No, except the wet hops. Yeah, I totally went off track there. So we implemented this year. We did a bunch of collaborations on wet hops. We have our original hop yard, which is 5 rows of 50 plants each, and there are 5 new varieties that we put in. A lot of them are good for pilsners, because we ripped out the original hops we'd put in there, and we want to continue to do that. So we don't sell them, we trade it for beer. So people come, we cut down the hops, they take them back to their brewery, pick them with their people, and make a beer, release it, and then we've been putting them on tap here or selling it out of cans in our bottle shop as a collaboration, because collaborations people love doing. So we do it with wet hops. But no, we consume 100%. We used to sell, obviously. The first year we made Farmstead Ale, our first commercial beer, we were using 100% our own hops in that beer, and that was the whole MO. We'll expand, we'll put another 10 or 20 acres of hops in and keep up with that. And it became very apparent very quickly that there was no way we were going to grow enough hops to satisfy the consumption of that one beer. And so we knew at that point that we had to go out and contract with our fellow growers in the region. So Clear Valley hops, Big Head hops, Hey Ho, a few others as well, Can Aussie. But 100% of our hops are Ontario, so that's key.
Fantastic. What would you say with all the beer that's brewed, if you take that as 100%, your hops go into what percentage of the beer that you brew?
Yeah, so we definitely try to put our hops into every single beer.
Okay.
And usually dry hopping applications. So we make two beers at Wellington. So Big Head Amber, our two off, we have like our core, and we have these two offsite products. We work really well with Wellington. We have a huge amount of respect for those guys. Farmstead, we started making there because we couldn't get our equipment in, our building renovated in time. And we were using 100% our hops in that process. And then Big Head went over there as well early on, and the demand outpaced a 10-barrel brew house and 2 tanks. We have a third tank coming, but 2 20-barrel tanks. I mean, we are tiny. And so the 100% dropped to 50%, then 25%. And so usually each beer, some beer, we do the on-site beers because, these are 20-barrel batches. It can be 100% Goodlot hops, and those are always featured. We talk about it. But we talk about the other hop farms just as much in terms of what they're putting into our beers. So Farmstead Ale and Big Head Amber, the two that we really sort of exported the brewing of and export the distribution of, essentially, we're sort of the 16 to 22% range of our hops in that beer. And the rest, 80% comes from, for Farmstead Ale, it's all Clear Valley. For Big Head Amber, it's all Big Head hops, because that's the organic hop one that we focus on. And we're in the 20% range in either of those beers, but almost always dry hopping, because I just feel like that's where I want to showcase what Gail, she's the CFO, Chief Farming Officer, hands down of the farm. I'm more muscle tractor driver, do what CFO tells me to do in the field. And, she gets the credit and hates when I give her the credit and call her the greatest, hop farmer in Ontario, but she is, she's responsible for that aspect, and we just think that the aroma hops are where to show it off. And we grow Cascade and Nugget. So Nugget are great for bittering, but they've got a really fun aroma as well for dry hopping.
Pay credit where credit is due. Seems like you're doing that for your partner. That's pretty cool. And just the fact that you have like all this, the network of other hop farmers in and around the area obviously plays well for the hop farmers and yourself in brewing the beer. And I think you alluded to this previously, that hops are, someone told you not to do it, and from what I've read, it's a very tough crop also to grow. So the fact that you guys are doing it so well, and you have all these connections with other farmers that are doing it so well, is there a secret sauce to how you guys have become so successful in the hop farming world?
I wouldn't say we're successful in the hop farming world. Most hop farmers wouldn't claim success because it's so backbreaking. And literally this season, 2 farms got stripped of all of their product over the course of 3 days by a new pest that's arrived in Ontario, inchworm-like thing. One of our suppliers, Clear Valley, literally everything was fine. And then 3 days later, it's like, I'm not harvesting. So it's hard to be a successful hop farmer in an era of climate change, and hops are just so difficult to grow.
Right.
We just wing it. We've been winging it from day one. You go and find people who know more than you and try to learn from them or work for them. Mike Driscoll, who's a legendary guy in the industry, both from a hop farming, a brewing perspective originally, then a hop farm perspective, and then he was malting barley in Guelph. He would tell you, don't start a hop farm, don't start a brewery, don't start a malting operation. Most people will say that to you because, none of it is again, lucrative, but it's all based on passion. It's like being a musician, which is why so many musicians, I think, tend to become brewers or part of brewing teams, because there's a huge passion and artistic, aspect to what draws people to the industry. So
definitely an art overall. Absolutely. Well, if you're a musician and you start a brewery, you don't have to go out and find an act for your tap room, right?
Yeah,
I guess there's some. Yeah, there we go.
We're begging Mike Brooks to book more dates on our stage.
There we go.
Phil, why is being carbon neutral or carbon negative? Why is that so important to you? You said you were you have an environmental activist past going back to the 90s, which is pretty cool because the environmental cause is front and center currently, or at least certainly a lot more than it was 25 years ago. So why is that so important to you? And why has it been so important to you for a big chunk of your life?
That is the shortest answer I'm going to give you. It's all rooted in literally just being a kid in nature. I mean, I grew up in nature. Sault Ste. Marie is surrounded by epic nature. It's easy to access. Everybody, being an outdoors person is just what you do. It's either you're playing hockey or you're out in the bush doing something. And so I just grew up with a massive appreciation for those elements. And when I became aware, I wasn't really, aware, I guess, of the degradation of this planet until legitimately when I moved to the States. That's when I really got an education in terms of how far gone things were in so many regards, and how many great, wins we'd had in protecting water and air quality during really critical times in the 70s. And I just felt it was really important to, I sort of, same as being a brewer or a hop farm, you kind of vow a life of poverty to become a political activist, because your soul is filled with the actions of your day-to-day sort of existence. And so I just really love nature. I love animals. I love trees particularly, and I just don't like the destruction of those things. I don't like the way the world's been going. And so it just seemed sensible to kind of commit to that my whole life.
It sounds like, you were carbon negative, you said. Now it sounds like you're still doing pretty well. Is there a way that you can continue moving forward, potentially with more solar panels, with other sources of electricity, wind, thermal, something like that? Are those plans in the works for you? Is it something it sounds like you're pretty busy running a hop farm and a brewery. So really, is that something that is sort of at the center of plans for the near future?
So yeah, busy. We're all super busy, but it's like packaging the beer, removing the snow, cutting the grass. I'm general maintenance manager here as much as I'm CEO. So as we all do everything. There are a lot of there's a lot of low hanging fruit in the brewing industry. We've built a really great facility. We power with solar. We've got electric equipment. We can monitor most of that. Byproduct of making beer, CO2. How do you recapture that? That's a big one in terms of that overall equation. Spunding, that German technique of right before the end of fermentation, closing off your valve and re-immersing that CO2. And that's one thing we've adopted early on to sort of take out some of that CO2 equation. The other thing is there is technology. I read an article recently about a brewery in Alberta who've got a machine that they literally plug into their unit tanks or FEs, and they compress that CO2 and then use it to carbonate the beer in the bright, or I guess later on in the process. And so that eliminates, that is a closed loop CO2 system. So we looked into that technology. We have an order in for their new small unit in Austin, Texas. I forget the name of the company. I wish I could give them props right now because it seems to be the only one out there. It was $174,000, and everybody will fall off their chair at 10-barrel brew house size and be like, yeah, that's impossible. I can't, there's no way I can make enough money to pay that back unless someone gave it to me. That's always going to be difficult. That CO2 equation. Electric vehicles is an obvious one. We burn unleaded fuel in our delivery van and our pickup truck, which are our two delivery vehicles. And so switching to electric would be awesome there. That would take care of a big portion of what we do. Our farming's pretty dialed in, and yes, we are going to install more solar panels just to stopgap. We kind of know where we sit right now in the overall carbon equation. And so we will stopgap with another 10 or 20 kilowatts of solar modules as well to power our operation, and put in what we call sort of little mini microgrid systems. Like we have a food truck we're putting a couple of deep cell batteries in there with some solar panels to provide them some electricity on the lighting and aspects. So just like wherever you can chip away at carbon emissions to get to that goal, which again, everybody in the 21st century should have to carbon account what their load is. Otherwise, like, sorry, we can't allow you to start that business because you haven't done any carbon accounting. Like, all the allowance of carbon has been spent in the 20th century and into the early 21st century. Now we have to be very careful about what we load. And if you don't have a plan, then I cannot give you a license to practice business. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's where it should be going right now, legitimately. I mean, we are in a crisis situation. We can see it quite legitimately right now. And I say this not as a doomsayer, because I have nothing but hope and faith in the future. But, you know, when I worked at the David Suzuki Foundation, I was on the climate change team. We were working on the health aspect of climate change and smog and things of that nature. And all the money the Canadian government could save by shutting down coal-fired plants, which we did in Ontario. You can clearly track the number of asthma days in Ontario, the amount of emergency room visits and the exact cost and how much money we saved in our medical system by getting rid of coal-fired plants. So that kind of stuff. But we were looking at models, you know, at the Suzuki Foundation, I recall 50 years into the future. It's like, oh, there's going to be this chaos and this chaos, oceans warming, currents changing. And the impacts that I see around me right now are the impacts we were talking about far down the road. I mean, it's definitely, there's an acceleration going on in this climate change world. So carbon accounting is more important than ever. And so you see other breweries who are doing this, you know, I mean, some big boys and upstarts are like, literally, it's like, we've bought the offsets for this, or we are going to do this. You know, it's in our DNA from day one. So we applaud whatever way people, whether it's bullfrog power or doing it on site like we're doing, so long as people are aware that this is the path you got to tread. So yeah, we've got plans to get there. We still got a ways to go.
Guys, you got a plan. I feel like it's a lot more in place than you know, not to say other breweries, but most businesses in Ontario. Like, you know, obviously we run an operation, and we're not using a lot of carbon, I guess, necessarily, but even just from what you mentioned right now, makes me want to take a look at even at our own operations and see what we can do better. And just to get that awareness out there, I think is huge. What people are and are not doing.
I think that's probably coming in the near future, something that Phil, you were referring to, being as an enterprise, being more accountable to exactly what you're actually putting out in your production. If you're a manufacturer of any kind, if you operate vehicles, I think we'll look back on this pretty quickly as, oh wow, it was kind of a wild, wild west that you could just sort of open a business and start making things, and people didn't really check up all that much on what you were actually emitting into the atmosphere.
It's not necessarily, I mean, it's our parents' lifetime that you could put a, you know, whatever plant or factory in Chicago, let's say, and put a tailpipe to the Chicago River, Illinois River, I guess I should say Toronto, to Lake Ontario from Toronto. You could literally put a tailpipe into the lake, and that was legal. Oh yeah, the shit just goes down the drain. And the brewing industry went through that same issue. Oh yeah, no, we use 12-to-1 ratio water to beer. And then some, you know, water treatment plants in smaller communities that had new breweries started getting overwhelmed by the effluent from those breweries and realized, no, you guys are throwing a lot of stuff down the drain. It's not just as easy, it's down the drain, it's out of sight. And we do that in a hyper way. Like, I'm on a septic system. So what I use to clean my tanks, the amount of water I use in my cleaning process, everything that goes through my drain has to be accounted for, because I have bacteria in a septic field. That's my disposal system for all of my wastewater on this farm, or in the brewery. No, on the whole farm, we're on septic. So we have to be really vigilant about what goes down, but it's been mostly like out of sight, out of mind. It goes down the drain. It's all free water. It doesn't matter. So the beer industry's had that reckoning with water. I think we've all really attacked that as an industry together. But there's a long way to go for all industries. I mean, for sure, we have to get out of this industrial revolution 19th century mindset that everything is limitless. It clearly is not. We live on spaceship Earth. And so, you know,
it's a good spaceship.
Oh, it's the I don't know if you saw that billboard. Someone put it outside of Tesla's headquarters in Texas or whatever it was. It was like, Mars, just so you know, Mars sucks. Love Earth. Like there's no other planet that we are aware of that's got anything like the character of this like most amazing blue jewel. So I mean, it drives me nuts, between the legal system and the political system. Like, let's get it together, people. And the beer industry, farmers, everybody, like we all great advocates for this, and we're all on the same page. So let's make it an important thing. Again, there's a lot of other important issues that we're fighting in this industry right now. This is one of them. It's no more important than any other, but it's what I'm most passionate about, obviously, because I keep going on and on about it.
Yeah. Phil, can I ask you this again? We can come back to hops and beer. This is my last kind of macro question, but I have arguments with my wife about this. You get probably most of your electricity, as the province does, probably from nuclear power. So what are your thoughts on nuclear power?
Oh no, I'm not going to get into that debate. But no, we're grid connected. It's not like I'm off the grid and I'm only supplying myself with electrons. So I'm getting a lot of natural gas. I'm closer to natural gas power plants, but probably get some nuclear. What do I think of nuclear? I can't go down that wormhole. That'd be the miracle. It's the best, but it's the worst. Yeah. I've been anti-nuke my whole life. So I've never changed that position. There's a lot of climate change activists that tell me I'm out of my mind, that it's impossible to achieve what the planet needs to achieve with power demand without nuclear. But I choose to just say, well, Fukushima.
Yes. That was a bad incident. Yeah, of course.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Could have been a
I
lot
thought,
worse.
yeah. I thought maybe I could get a bit more out of you with that.
Oh, I wish.
But that's all right.
No. There's way smarter people about that topic than I. I'm a solar guy.
Fair enough. So are most of your panels, is it suffice to say they're on your roof? Are they on also the ground panels as well?
Half and half. So half are on top, like above my head here, the first system we put in. And Gail and I literally hung from these rafters. It was like our first big upgrade on this farm. I can see it now. I had Gail in a harness in these rafters, putting these big 2x8, new support beams in that we had to put in from the engineer, and we had no money, so we had to do it ourselves. And 10 are on the ground outside, so they're right on the north side of the brewery. Everything facing sort of southwest and south directly. And solar is the best. It's so elegant and beautiful. It's solid state. There's no moving parts. Doesn't break down. That's why it's in outer space, because it can't go in like, oh, we need to go change the battery. It's like you need something super robust and super reliable. That's solar power. That's why I got into solar power. It's like, why is this not more mainstream? It's really good.
Got that big nuclear reactor out in space. Why aren't we using that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The Russians will blow it up. That's why.
Let's hope not. Yeah.
You want something controversial?
Yeah.
I'll throw that at you.
Good. Fair enough.
Space junk. I read an article. Space junk is now a problem
major problem
for the Earth. Yeah.
It's been for a while. Yeah.
You guys have all seen that movie. And Sandra Bullock.
Yeah.
George Clooney.
Gravity.
Sandra Bullock. Yeah.
Gravity. Yeah. That's what they're dealing with up there with a fleck of paint. It's crazy. Sorry, this is my third beer now. I know I'm probably, you said I could call you if I don't think I should have said that. That's private information. I'm going to call you in the morning. I'm like, can we do this again when I don't drink beers before and during?
Phil, what beer are you on now? Tell us what you're drinking.
So I'm drinking Pippa. I was drinking Stone's Throw, which is our East Coast Vermont yeast IPA, which I love. This is Pippa, our farm dog, who literally came to the farm with us as a puppy when we bought this farm in 2009. Not to be a downer, she died this year. So we did this session porter in her honor. There's a little black lab on the side, if you can see that, which is her outline.
Oh, cute.
Pippa.
So Pippa, yeah, Pippa porter. You guys haven't had any beer. I thought you said we were all going to have a beer together.
Yeah, I know. I think Garrett's under the weather.
Yeah, unfortunately.
I'm sorry.
I'm not.
Water for me, but
Omicron. It's gotta be Omicron.
Oh, I did a test and thankfully it is not. But
good
old fashioned cold.
Yeah, this is very rare. Typically, we are drinking. But,
okay.
You're drinking. You're drinking for all of us.
Oh, now That's going to be the last thing people remember. Oh,
No.
yeah. He was semi-articulate. He went on too long and he's a bit of a lush.
No, it's good. Phil, can I ask, I hate to stay on this topic, but I find it very insightful. If you had to give like a letter grade for craft beer, we can talk about just in the province of Ontario in terms of its environmental impact. I mean, I think if you speak with craft brewers and brewery owners across Ontario, it seems like there is a lot of interest and the culture is there to definitely accept having more greener alternatives. Yeah, it kind of just goes along. I think the culture is it's
100%.
It's one and the same. Yeah, but in terms of, well, talk is cheap, like in terms of the actual production, if you had to give a letter grade to craft beer, like the craft breweries that you are more familiar with, maybe you don't have to be specific, obviously, but if you had to.
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's a tough question. I mean, because like you said, I think everybody's value set is headed in the same direction. I think everybody wants to do that, but not to harp on the fact that, making beer is not a, multi-million-dollar industry. It's a lifestyle choice. You are making really hard and important decisions about how to scrape out, a few margin points to pay yourself at the end of the day, like whoever starts it. I mean, our whole team gets paid, but the two founders, Gail and I, we just got on the payroll last year for the first time. So those are tough decisions for people to make, but there's so many incremental things you can do. You're spunding your tank, to reduce your CO2 costs. Hey, I'm saving money by reintroducing CO2 instead of to atmosphere to my beer. I'm going to pay for it down the road. So there's small things people can do. Some people, I mean, like Carbon Brewing, I'll throw out a few names. I mean, Carbon Brewing we talked to them early on. They came out with this, the whole idea is that we're going to do this exactly as we're describing, like accounting for carbon, going to be carbon neutral. Cowbell, bought a bunch of gas offsets and they are carbon neutral. That is awesome. I mean, anybody who's using electricity, which is every brewery in Ontario, can buy bullfrog power or some variation of that. It's a bit more expensive, so it's tough to say, we pay $18,000 a year for our electricity. Now we're going to pay 24. Well, that's like a quarter of somebody's salary for a year to give a break to the head brewer to have at least one more person at least wash their kegs, so they're not breaking their backs at some low wage, which most brewers in this province do. Like, they're doing it for passion, not for retirement purposes. But probably the biggest inhibiting factor is that most people don't own their facility. It's like their leaseholder improvements. What am I going to spend my money on? Making the floors better, whatever. Like, they don't own the real estate, so it's hard for them, and that's their biggest factor outside of their delivery services. But big impact. Like, you got to measure. Like, we measure the carbon impact of how far does our ingredient travel. So yeah, I buy a lot of grain from Saskatchewan and Manitoba, and I even brought some grain in from Patagonia because there were tons of Patagonia malts coming in down the road from us here at Ontario Malting Company, OMG, malting group, OMG, down the road, which has since closed. We were pretty psyched about those guys. For 2 years they were malting local barley and then importing barley. When they decided not to malt anymore, like, well, we get our barley like 5 kilometers down the road at another farm. But they couldn't make a go of that, just couldn't make common sense. But how far does your ingredient come? That's a huge impact. So if somebody just said, I'm going to buy 10% Ontario hops instead of from Yakima, there's a huge carbon impact right there that you just take out of the equation because it didn't travel across the country. It's traveled 38 kilometers to your brewery. And every brewery's got a hop farm in Ontario. But it's crazy that every hop farmer's got inventory still from 2020, basically. Some from 2019. I bought a bunch of 2019 inventory. It's like, I need to get this out of the freezer because I got new inventory coming in. I was like, oh God, I'll take it all. But they're offering it at $7-8 a pound, which is crazy in Ontario because it costs way more to grow here. So I think generally, for sensibility, philosophical, heartfelt desire. Again, there's a lot of other issues breweries are dealing with right now that, talk to Ren. It's like, there's a lot of shit that we need to deal with as a culture in part before we get into the mechanics of how our breweries operate. Yeah, the planet's on fire, but, we've been abusing people in this industry or not representing people in this industry for so long. Let's deal with our immediate surroundings of these people. We need to deal with rectification of like how we've treated women in this industry and people of color in this industry and anybody in this industry. It's been this like white machismo, like we're a like totally free zone on this farm. We made it clear to everybody who works here, like you can kick anybody off this farm anytime, whether it's on the patio or just in the brewery, if they are displaying any ism, except peace, love, acceptance, and general goodness to the world, then they are not welcome on this farm, and we don't want them to drink our fucking beer. So we got to deal with those issues in order. So I'll, A for effort, but we're probably at D- right now in Ontario environmentally for sure. D, maybe D+ at the most. But it's just, there's other fish to fry.
Mm-hmm.
It's just really bubbling up. And probably there should be some assistance, from the feds, from the province to help people upgrade their facilities. And that's coming for sure. It's definitely coming. Energy efficiency, more solar PV, that kind of stuff.
So if you could like wave your wand and have some sort of, let's say just the last couple of points you mentioned, some sort of maybe governmental help, what do you think would do, or provide the biggest impact?
Well, the one thing that we really, and we talk about this with the McKinnon brothers all the time, is that there should be a whole, VQA category for beer in Ontario that has a percentage of local ingredients. The breweries making that beer should have a different provincial tax rate than breweries that are not. That to me is the easiest policy arm to get all the breweries in Ontario to look to the left and look to the right and be like, hey, hop farmer brother and sister down the road for me, if I buy 20% of my ingredients from you, I get to save $20,000 a year in tax bill. I've been incentivized by the provincial government to, instead of give them the 20 grand, I'm giving you the 20 grand so you can reimburse that in your local economy and your family, and that resilient local economic structure that is what we used to be all completely based on before huge globalization occurred. So that would be a huge policy impact. And that would also deal with carbon offsets, because now my supplier is next door. That would encourage barley farmers and other farmers to put in maybe more malting facilities to say, oh, well, now there's a tax incentive. These guys are going to sign 5-year contracts with me because they're going to save $20,000 on their tax bill because they're buying local ingredients. So that, I tell everybody who will listen, politically connected, other farmers, McKinnon brothers, who have talked about it with the most, it's like, that is just the easiest lever for Doug Ford or any other leader in Ontario to implement. Every party should be like, yep, we all agree with that. Let's make that law, because that benefits all the farmers and the breweries and local economics. The other thing would be, obviously like the eco-energy type programs that the feds put in to help people convince their landlords to do energy upgrades to their buildings, and electrification of our distribution fleets. Because you think of how many breweries are running around on the roads with gas or diesel, and I literally follow other breweries from brewery to brewery or from bar to bar some days when I'm delivering. It's like I see their skid right there at the LCBO or right there at the beer store or right there at the same bar. I'm like, man, like we could have cut our carbon impact in half today if we just coordinated and loaded our beer together. So how do you instigate that type of thing? Electrification is the first thing to get the carbon out of the equation as much as possible, except obviously nuclear powered grid in the car. Those are some like low hanging fruit, I think, that are available to us.
Yeah, those sound like great ideas. I can't remember who it was. I think maybe it was not Cowbell, Block 3 or Hometown. And I think they did something to that effect where it was, they'd help out other local breweries with their deliveries and just keeping one truck on the road as opposed to, 3 or 4 or 5. Yeah, that's great. Hey, it's a fantastic idea. And it'd be nice to get some of that implemented for sure. You have a better understanding, and like you say, with your history and as a political activist, to get that going. And hey, if there's anything we can do to help out with that in the future, like we're obviously indirectly related to craft breweries throughout the Southern Ontario region, but it's always nice to hear those ideas, and pushing them forward is something we would love to help with.
Totally. Well, we should call Ivan McKinnon and re-engage this conversation. The election is coming up, obviously, next year. And it's not a huge policy paper to put something together to be like, hey, float this to everybody. Like, honestly, every party will agree on it. And I've never been able to get any traction. Not that I've tried hard enough, obviously, and any traction to be like, of course, we'll sponsor this. Who's not going to agree with, and especially Doug Ford, because he seems to be so into alcohol, despite the fact that he doesn't drink, that he's so into priming this local industry, which is great because it's a massive tax opportunity for the government, obviously. And so why would this not fall within the purview? And of course, he wants to appeal to farmers, not to give it to Doug, not to be controversial. I probably won't vote for him. However, I don't care which party carries this forward, because I think all parties would carry this type of initiative forward. And again, it benefits the total local economic, value of this region. That's that local resilient economic force that allows us in global crises, when the Suez Canal gets blocked and there's a global pandemic, we all realize, holy shit, where's our food supply coming from? Yet we pave over hundreds of kilometers of prime food land, like the best soil in Canada, for 400 series highways. You can see why I'm not voting for Doug. Against the 413, want to protect the Greenbelt, all these things. Like, why are we putting all this new housing out in the distance with these highways? Oh, it's just because people can make money. That is the opposite of what we need as a civilization to be doing right now. How can we not all be on the same page? So I don't care if Doug Ford carries this forward and we get this tax incentive, but I still wouldn't vote for him, I guess, ultimately. I shouldn't say that. Maybe we should cut this. This is the part I'm going to call you tomorrow. I'm like, hey, really got to cut out the anti-Ford shit, because I think Doug's done a great job in a lot of files over the last couple of years. But I tend to be quite left-wing, if you wouldn't know by the sort of things I care about.
Never would have guessed.
Phil, I think, wow, maybe we could get Garrett. Maybe we could get someone from the Ford government on, and maybe Phil, if you would join us for another conversation closer to the election, maybe we could have a political discussion.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Would you be down?
A great idea. Yeah, of course. No, that's a great idea. You guys should host a voter forum. I don't know if that's going to be happening, if we'll be back to that, but as a political organizer, it was always about getting all the potential candidates in front of a room of 100 people from all walks of life, and just have this open dialogue and forum. And then you really get to see the sense of the man or woman sitting in those candidate chairs. Is that somebody I want to represent? I am not partisan. I will vote for whoever I think actually cares, is honest, and doing it for the right reasons, versus someone who's super on the left, who I think is just trying to fulfill their ego somehow. So don't get me wrong, as a left-wing activist, I'd vote for anybody like Michael Chong, Conservative Party, Ontario province. I would vote for Michael Chong in a heartbeat, because he totally gets it, and I want him at the table with the rest of the Tories. Like, Michael Chong is a rock star. He's Tory. Anyway, sorry, going off track again.
Not at all. I think that's a great idea.
Promise next, but can we do this earlier next time? Like,
yeah.
I just got that.
Yeah, I think that's honestly, Phil, if we could keep in touch, maybe we'll organize something closer to the election. I would love.
That'd be awesome. I think we should. I think people care. It's like the easiest way to make good laws. Vote for the right people, good laws get made, because that's how it works.
Of course. We try, I'm very interested in politics as well. We try not, this podcast isn't overly political, but I think it's pretty hard not to be when speaking to small businesses all over the province in the craft beer world. So I think if you're down, we're down.
I'm totally down. I've had a great time hanging out with you guys. I'm sorry for blathering on so much about stuff.
It won't be at all.
No, in my track a little bit there.
No, your blathering was wonderful.
Very, very good stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to stop, Phil. That was an hour, a little bit more. So if you can believe it.
Flew by.
Yeah, it really did. So Phil Winters, Goodlot Farmstead Brewing in Caledon, Ontario. Phil, we look forward to chatting with you the next time.
Garrett, Andy, you guys are awesome.
Thank you so much, Phil. Appreciate it.
Cheers, Phil. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all our interviews and beer-related content. Remember, craft beer is here.